on the reserve there's koi graves, but we are not really allowed to go and visit the graves. So, and also koi drawings, but it's not like accessible. For instance, I would like to go and show my child someday, but we can't go. And also the people that used to live on the reserve, they don't live there anymore. They bought some houses at a nearby town and they just moved them there. So it was like apartheid all over again, the forced removals and so on. So I think the people also still feels hurt about that. For instance, I think it's important for the children that I work with to have a connection with nature and the animals, but we can't, we don't have access. So that's really also sad for me. That I can only, for instance, in the art, I can only, for instance, in the art, introduce like the animals with clay sculptures and paper puppets and so on. But to for them to see the real thing would be an added bonus. But we don't have access.
I mean, I really think it's terrible that they can't go and visit those graves, because in elephant society, elephants actually go out of their way to go and visit the bones of their deceased relatives. And then they've described it as mourning behavior. So, for instance, if a whole herd finds the remains of another elephant, they just go silent and they just stand around and they pick the bones up and they stroke the bones. They also lift up their back feet and just make circular movements over the bones. So it's a form of respect. Sometimes they carry the bones for a certain distance because they've got a consciousness of their kin that has died. So it seems really cruel that you as a human would not be able to reconnect with your ancestry and with your past. So that's, if you have to draw a parallel between people and elephants, I think that would be a given, that you should be permitted to do that. And also, I mean, elephants today, because human populations are expanding at such an accelerated rate, they've become refugees to our expansion as well. So they've been displaced from previous ranges, or they're trying to carve their way through human societies and human networks to visit their historical foraging ranges, and that's also sad. So there is to me a lot of parallels between elephant society and people that occupied these areas many years ago. And I think both have become sort of victims of development, which I find very strange and very sad. So I can understand why it would mean a lot for you to take kids to real elephants, because that's what they used to enjoy in the past. So that shouldn't be taken away from any human being. I think that's, if you want to talk about human rights, that should be a basic human right, that you can connect with nature, because we all come from nature anyway, and we are part of nature, although we often don't even realize that. Yeah.
We visited Edo Elephant Park. So, and then I saw the interaction between the mother elephant and the baby, and she would just like look at him, and he would understand, or something is going on there. So that was amazing for me. But because sometimes when I look at my little one, she would know, don't do anything funny. So
Yeah, it's just a look.
Yeah, I just wanted to know more about, how they communicate, with each other, the mother and the child. And,
yeah, well, they've got very strong social bonds. That's the backbone of elephant society. And I honestly believe elephants are symbolic they're important ecologically, but they're symbolic to human society because they've still got the moral fibers that we're eroding daily. So in elephant society, they respect the old. So to me, elephants are symbolical of moral compasses that we should still be retaining if we want to end up being good human beings. So it's that reverence for the old. In elephant society, the oldest female will lead the herd and remember where to go to wells that the younger ones will not remember. So in times of drought or crisis, then the old female or the old grandmother will remember that that's where I used to go. and lead the whole herd and save the whole herd by remembering these historical important resource routes. And that's why the whole of Elephant Society is focused on retaining that information that older individuals keep. And if we look at how today in society we just put old people in old age homes, they have no function for society anymore. That to me is horrific, because even those stories that they tell should still have a purpose for us. I mean, I know we've all got iPads and computers and stuff like that, but we often, and especially young people, they know a lot, but they don't have the experiential knowledge. So they haven't experienced the knowledge that they've been given, which old people have experienced that, and we should always respect them for that. And when it comes to the bonds between mothers and daughters and siblings and that whole related family unit of an elephant, they will defend any youngster with their life, the entire family, not just the mother. And I think we can learn from that as well, because, you know, in human society, it's often a single mother that's left to rear a child. And we've had a collapse and an erosion of that entire family unit that can actually grow a child and teach a child at different levels. So I feel there's a lot of pressure put on single mothers to rear children, and it's because of that breakdown of a tight family unit, which elephants have retained, and very sadly, which poaching is removing. So poachers come in, they shoot the older individuals because an elephant's tusks grow throughout their life, so the older individuals have more ivory. So those are the first targets, and then they leave these orphan, displaced young elephants, which then don't know how to navigate through life because they've lost those older individuals. And I think that's also on a moral ground, we need to protect elephants, because I think symbolically they are moral compasses to human society. So not only their ecological function. Yeah.
And I wanted to know, they say that an elephant, or there's a saying, they all know just an elephant, or you remember like an elephant. So is it true?
Yes, no, they do. They do have incredible memories. To give you one example, so there was a person called Randall Moore that took circus elephants from America and brought them to South Africa to rewild them and to let them free. And he brought them to a reserve, and obviously they were trained circus elephants, so they knew all the commands. And he took this one female that he was very fond of, and he introduced her into the reserve where there were all these little orphan babies that were orphans that were captured from culling operations in Kruger. But she was very valuable because she was an older individual that could show them how they should navigate through life. But then she developed an injury, so she had an abscess on her leg, and they had to dart her every day to try and treat this abscess. So they didn't want her to die because of her very important mentoring role. And they were worried darting her every single day with a very strong morphine derivative could be bad for her health. So then somebody came up with the idea, but can't we get Randall to come back and give her the commands just to come out and to present her leg so that we can treat it? And so he actually flew to South Africa, and he called her out of the bush. And it was something like 6 or 8 years after she had been released. And she just walked straight to him, listened to all his commands. I mean, she was in terrible pain. And she would listen to Randall. They could treat her leg, which was very painful, purely on his command 8 years ago. And it was actually a very emotional film clip that they made. Firstly, him reconnecting with this animal that he gave a better life, and also her still respecting him to that extent that she would withstand the pain. She would leave the little orphan babies in the background and come out to him, and they could treat her until she recovered. But that to me is like a real example of how elephants can remember. But there's actually a lot of examples. I mean, just those memories that the grandmothers or the gogos have in terms of going to areas where there was water, and droughts periodically come around every 12 years sometimes, so they can remember 12 years ago where they should navigate towards to take the family to water. And that just gives you an example of how wonderful they are in terms of their capacity to remember things. And also remember where are safe areas, where are unsafe areas. So they've got incredible spatial maps of where it's safe and where it's unsafe. And that in South Africa, we've got fences around everything. But in other places like Kenya, where there's no fences, they still spend up to 98% of their time in protected areas, even though there's not a fence. And then they realize that they've got to move from one protected area to another, but at night, and they've got to run to get through human landscapes. So they map and they remember how they've got to use a very big area in relation to what we're doing. So they've realized that if they do it at night when we're sleeping, then they'll have the best chance of survival. So, you know, they've got memories at different levels. So memories in terms of what we're doing is their greatest enemy today, where it's safe, where it's unsafe, where there's critical resources. And of course, the older you are, the more memory you build up over time. And that's why this mentoring role that older elephants play in elephant society is so critical for the survival of the species, which is amazing.
And the other thing, when the young male elephants are being pushed out, you know, I'm just thinking the elephants care for them, you know, and so well, and then they have to push them out, you know.
Well, I mean, that's also amusing to watch when you're in the privileged position of watching elephants in the field all day. I mean, it's sometimes like a screeching cow that goes and pokes a young bull in the bum, but it's also that those young bulls themselves are like kids, like teenagers that get tired of the constraints. You know, the family always move out of respect. They'll move at the pace of the slowest animal in the herd. So if it's a very old grandmother, they'll move very slowly so she's not left behind. And if you're young and you want to go and explore the world, then why have you got to wait for grandmother? So those young bulls also choose out of their own accord to slowly start lagging further and further behind. So it's a combination. The mother has to maybe push or discipline the young bull because they start getting strong and then they play too rough with the babies. And that's when the mother will go and poke them in the bum and say, that's enough. So it's a little bit of the discipline gets tighter, but it's also they have a will to move away because they don't want to wait for grandmother their entire life. So then they start moving further and further behind. But then again, they want company because all their life they've had lots of elephants around them. So then they find these older bulls that are their mentors throughout life, and they latch on from older bull to older bull to learn the ways of life. And if you don't give them that structure, they become unruly and they become like a teenager that's given a credit card and let loose into the world. So there's another example in South Africa where once again, a reserve was restocked with little orphan baby elephants, and they all grew up, and all the ecologists said, oh, it will be perfect, there's good food, there's good water, everything's fine for this herd to become a functioning elephant population. But there was a breakdown of the social structure, so there were no older bulls within that society. So when these young bulls started growing up, they started coming into must earlier, which is a time of reproductive activity for an elephant bull. And there were no older bulls that actually suppressed the must cycle of the younger bulls. So even if a bull starts coming into must, usually under natural circumstances at around 25 years old, these bulls started coming into must at 18, 17. And they ended up killing over 50 rhino, harassing the cows, chasing tourists, so just behaving like delinquent adults because they had no mentoring bulls to control their behavior. So they actually then had to go back to Kruger, bring in some bulls of 40 to 50 years old, put them in this reserve, and everything was then back to normal. So that just shows you very much like people. If you've got young teenage boys that are full of adrenaline, full of adventure, and they form their own little gangs because they have no role models, older role models to follow, it can lead to terrible consequences. I mean, they can end up peddling in drugs and killing people and stealing vehicles, to get that element of excitement, but not having proper leadership. So I think that's also very important. Once again, the moral compass that elephants can show us how things should be and what we should fight for to retain in human society. And I mean, you get this breakdown of society when you start creating abnormal places where elephants need to live, or you influence their social structure by poaching all the older ones. So there's been some great scientific work done where they've actually found out that elephants suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder just as soldiers would. So if you subject a young guy to too much violence and death and fear when they're young, then they have, and it's been clinically proven with psychologists, they have what you call post-traumatic stress disorder at a later age, where they cannot form normal sexual relationships. They've got an unnatural, startled fear response. And it's all clinically known in human society, but now they're actually seeing, you see the same in elephants. So you get elephants that become exceedingly aggressive, or like those bulls that had to grow up without the older bull. They just wanted to mate with everything and ended up killing rhinos. So unnatural sexual relationships because of the post-traumatic stress that they were subjected to when they were orphans and they were taken away from their family to go and restock this reserve. So there's so many parallels, which because of what nature's given you. I think that's so much more difficult to cope with when compared to if it's just like you've got to move from one city house to another. But if you have to move from where your ancestry was, so where your roots were, and how maybe the smells and the sounds that you grew up with as a child, that's very traumatic. It's not just moving from flat to flat or house to house. Like, be happy because now I've given you a roof and running water or whatever it is. You've lost that connection, and that's maybe why plays like this is so important, because you can reenact that connection that you used to have, and then you can learn from elephants, develop strong leadership, and fight to get it back, but in a very constructive way. I think that's and I mean, using what's happening to elephants now in terms of poaching and the total breakdown of social structure because of excessive poaching, there's a lot that I think children can identify with in terms of looking at elephants and trying to find strong leaders that can show them where to go and how to change things and how to peacefully ask for what every person deserves and what every elephant deserves these days. Yeah. Respect it. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's beautiful. And if you guys can do that for the kids and the koi, I mean, that's wonderful. It would be great to know. And hopefully this play will allow you to at least go and see those engravings. I mean, I can't believe that you can't. So, and the graves. Just tell them you're a herd of people, just like a herd of elephants. You need to go and pay respect. And that's all you want to do.